If you are unhappy with the decision of the local planning authority, then the letter that accompanies the decision notice provides relevant information on the appeals process. Thank you for your question, Mr. Stoneman. So moving on to the next agenda item is agenda item 6.1, and that relates to property at 21 Mutley Road. This item was debated at significant length the last time we were here, and it's right to say that there was also a further meeting since the previous planning committee in attendance by officers, and I, as chair of the planning committee, was also in attendance with the applicant's agent, where clarification was being sought as to the outcome of the decision from the last time we met, in order to inform the applicant and his agent as to how best to proceed with regards to this application. Members will recall that that was agreed at the last meeting. That meeting did take place. Amy, you're going to take us through this. I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So good afternoon. This presentation will provide an update on the application since being deferred at November Planning Committee. This application is a technical detailed consent for 4 dwellings in association with associated work, at 21 Mutley Road, following the approval for permission in principle. The site is located at the east end of an existing terrace of properties within a raised position above Mutley Road in Manor-Mead. The site is located within the Manor-Mead Conservation Area. The proposal seeks to provide 4 dwellings as a continuation of the existing terrace. The application was deferred in order to allow negotiations between officers and the applicant. In addition to what's been heard at November's Planning Committee in terms of the architectural and aesthetic design of the 4 dwellings proposed, and that is taken back to the next practical Planning Committee. Since the application was deferred, the applicant met with officers and provided an amended planning statement setting out the proposed revisions and points of clarification following the committee's comments. While no amended plans have been submitted, the applicant is seeking to make the following changes to the proposed development. They seek to change the external walls to painted render, which would be secured through amending condition 9, which requires details of the external materials to be submitted prior to work commencing on site. The condition will be amended to include, the details shall include the external walls will be painted render and provide details on the specification of the render. I've included a slide just to show a comparison of what was submitted, which was the a honey buff brick. It's just on the left-hand side, and the render, which is stereotypical and characteristic of the area, which is shown on the existing properties here on Mutley Road. The applicant is also proposing to amend the bay window detail to a more traditional style, which can be secured by a pre-commencement condition. The applicant put forward that these details could be agreed by the head of development management and the chair of planning committee. However, following usual practice, we recommend the decision on this condition be delegated to the service director in association with the chair, vice chair, and shadow chair. An illustrative plan has been submitted, demonstrating the type of bay window detail that could be provided to mirror the existing terrace. So this is the illustrative plan that's been submitted to support since the last planning committee. So you see that it's got a more traditional style in comparison to what was originally submitted, which you see is a more modern take on a bay window. They're also proposing to change the wording of the condition 14 to ensure that any the garages are retained for parking of vehicles only. To do this, they'll secure this through condition 14 and amend the wording to include the garages hereby approved shall be retained for the parking of vehicles only. They're also proposing planting of an additional 13 native standard trees to ensure the number of replacement trees are in accordance with the guidance set out with the supplementary planning document. The trees are proposed to be planted along the southern boundary and will improve the screening between the site and the existing development. It is proposed that more mature specimens will be used. This will be secured through amending condition 13 to include details of the planting of 13 additional native standard trees on site to ensure that the development complies with the tree replacement guidance set out in the supplementary planning document. The proposed planting shall include mature specimens to be planted along the southern boundary. So I've just included the plan that was submitted with the last application, which is the tree replacement plan. So the southern boundary is just shown at the bottom of the screen, which is also shows that the replacement planting as proposed, but there'll be an additional 13 trees along that boundary. The amended planning statement also provided some further clarity on some of the points that were raised at Planning Committee. Concerns had been raised regarding the modern design of the originally submitted drawings. The planning statement highlights that the applicant had sought advice from the council through a pre-application service where they submitted plans showing a more traditional design of the terrace. At pre-application stages, the urban design officer advised that they would object to a more pastiche mock Victorian architectural expression of the proposed houses, and further advised that there is an opportunity for high quality innovative architecture which is unashamedly of its time. Addresses the issues of the day, including climate emergency, and responds sensitively to the site's green character. Following the advice of the scheme, revised plans were submitted for a contemporary design through this technical detail consent. They also wanted to highlight the terms that have been set by the previously approved permission in principle application on this site. Within the inspector's decision for the appeal, the inspector confirmed that permission in principle was granted to construct a terrace of 4 houses, widen the road and provide pavement at 21 Mutley Road in accordance with the term of the application, the permission in principle application. The inspector advised that the indicative drawings show that the site could accommodate a terrace of 4 dwellings that would be similar in scale and layout to the adjoining terrace. Such a development would not appear out of character with its surroundings. The planning statement also highlighted that the adjoining property at 21 Mutley Road has accommodation across 3 floors and 4 bedrooms, and that the building lines and ridge height are comparable of the proposal. Concerns were also raised regarding the loss of the protected lime tree within the centre of the site. The applicant has therefore submitted a copy of the arboricultural report prepared by a specialist tree consultant that accompanied an application to fell the lime tree submitted in 2017. The report confirmed that the lime tree had been subject to topping, which dictates its future treatment and involves regular significant pruning. Topping creates hazards, stress and decay to the tree, and the report confirmed that as a result of the previous treatment, there is a large open cavity in the stem base. The report concludes that there are valid reasons to remove the lime tree, and it is not good practice to retain the tree which has been distressed. The report states that the only sustainable reasonable option is to fell and replace this tree. Following considerations of the application, the council had granted consent to fell this tree in February 2018. The trees were surveyed for the permission in principle application. The assessment confirmed the lime tree was categorised as under the British standard as a U category tree. Such trees are defined by the British standard as those in such a condition that they cannot realistically be retained as living trees in the context of the current land use for longer than 10 years. The amended planning statement also highlighted that the inspector made the following comments. Much of the tree cover has a limited lifespan regardless of the development. Permission to fell the tree was granted in February 2018, and it was found to be structurally compromised by a large open cavity in the stem base. While this permission has lapsed, there is no evidence to suggest that the health of the tree has improved. And further stated, the sycamore would be retained and the compromised lime and incompatible poorly managed trees would be replaced with appropriate on-site planting and street trees. This would ensure that the site maintains its contribution to the canopy cover and tree diversity of the city in the future, so it would accord with the aims of the plan. Concerns had been raised previously about the separation distances between the habitable windows, as the proposed development does not accord with the guidance set out within the supplementary planning document. In my officer report, I had noted that while the proposed does not comply with the separation distances set out in guidance, due to the existing separation distances between habitable room windows within the street being similar to what is proposed, it was not considered a reason to refuse the application. The submitted amended planning statement referred to the wording of the policy Dev 1, which states ensuring that new development provides a satisfactory daylight, sunlight, outlook, privacy and protection from noise disturbance for both new and existing residents, workers and visitors. Unacceptable impacts will be judged against the level of amenity generally in the locality. The planning statement also highlights that the supplementary planning document provides guidance on the implementation of policies in the JLP, including policy Dev 1. It states that the guidance advises the problems concerning privacy may be overcome by relocating windows or by the installation of roof lights. It also suggests that obscure glass may be provided as an appropriate solution where there are privacy concerns, and that planning conditions may be applied to planning permissions so that these solutions remain in place once the development is complete. The planning statement highlights that guidance states that the levels of privacy expected from a residential environment will differ depending on the location. For example, when densely developed contexts such as city, town or neighbourhood centres or areas within medieval street patterns, it is reasonable to assume that privacy might be less than in lower density neighbourhoods. And in these circumstances, other design solutions may be appropriate, such as oriel windows, for habitable room windows and obscure glazing. The planning statement states that in relation to the indivisibility between the proposed development and the properties on Mutley Road, by following the existing building line, the proposed development will not result in an arrangement that is any different from what is already exists in the area, highlighting that policy and guidance confirm that the acceptability of a development in terms of its impact on amenity of existing neighbours must be judged against the level of amenity generally in the area. The amended planning statement states that the proposed design works with the on-site constraints, accords with the terms set out by the existing approval and provides an acceptable level of amenity for existing properties and the occupants of the proposed homes. Through the use of obscure glazing and restricting the opening windows to the rear, there will be no unreasonable impacts from overlooking or indivisibility. Overall, it's considered that with the new and amended conditions, the proposed development would accord with policy. The proposed design would be in keeping with the character and appearance of the area, would not harm the conservation area, and would not have a detrimental impact on amenity of the neighbours. The decision is finely balanced, but ultimately, on balance, it's considered the proposed development, along with the recommended conditions, is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. We have just one speaker. Councillor Mahoney, would you like to come down to the front, please? Councillor, you're very familiar with these proceedings. You have 5 minutes. Would you like a 1 minute warning? Thank you. When you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I thought about not coming to speak today, but I'm glad I have, because there are at least 5 members of the committee, I think, who weren't here last month to hear the full presentation and see the slides that accompanied that. The first thing that strikes you if you drive up Mutley Road is this green canopy, which sort of overhangs the road and provides a lot of screening and habitat for wildlife and birds. Apart from the lime tree and other significant trees on the site, there are many bushes, and it certainly is a green lung, and it's only if you've been up there and had a look that you would appreciate that side of it. Also, which came out last time, it is an effective cul-de-sac in one direction, because traffic can only come off Manamead Road, it cannot enter Manamead Road from Mutley Road. So it's effectively a cul-de-sac in one direction, and it has no proper turning circle at the top where this proposed development will be situated. And I can only imagine how construction vehicles and other vehicles will have to perform 3-point turns. Cars have to do that at the moment. And these manoeuvres can only be some sort of hazard to pedestrians and cyclists who may well use that as a cut through from Manamead to the park or onwards into town. So I have concerns about the loss of habitat, not just the protected trees, but the hedgerows and bushes which surround the site, and they will not be reinstated quickly or even in the longer term, because there is not enough room left to do that. Car parking, that was an issue last time. This will be worsened. 4-bedroomed, 4-storey houses will attract several cars per house. There's one garage and a parking space in front. How many people will actually use the garage, and how many cars will then have to fight for parking in an area which is already tight? But another factor is that number 21 in whose garden this is being built, actually has very adequate parking for maybe 3, 4, 5 cars on that site at the moment, which of course they use rather than parking on the road. So there will also be additional cars needing to park from number 21 itself. The process of construction does concern me, how larger vehicles are going to manage to access such a site. They have to go up Oxford Avenue, then into Mutley Road. As I say, they cannot exit onto Manamead Road. And actually, they wouldn't even be able to access the site, certainly larger vehicles from Manamead Road, because the road is too narrow at that point. The appearance, I will agree, has been improved by the new design, but 4-storey houses are not really in keeping within this area. And of course, there is the fact that they are much closer to the houses opposite, window to window, than would be acceptable by today's standards. The justification, I gather, being that other houses in the road have no greater a gap between them. But of course, they were built, 100 years ago when the rules were different. So I do think that the new houses will be causing inconvenience and concern to the residents opposite from being overlooked at a close distance. So in conclusion, I have great reservations about the aspects of the development, its appearance, its location on the site, how it will be delivered, and the effect on parking and traffic issues in this already densely populated effective cul-de-sac. And I would urge the committee to refuse the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mahoney. There are no other speakers in respect of this matter. Members, it's over to you. If you would do the usual and give me a nod, and I'll add you to the list. So, Councillor Stoneman.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't here last month when this application was here, but I have watched it back on YouTube, so I know exactly what's been going on. And I will say that I don't think much has changed, but that isn't my question. My question is, the biodiversity on the site, there is a lot of greenery, wildlife habitat there. What impact is this potential development going to have, and what is the biodiversity net gain on the site with this proposed development? Thank you.
So we don't have to get, because this is a minor development, current guidance doesn't require them to give us a percentage. With majors, we ask for a 10%, so they haven't given us a definitive on percentage-wise of biodiversity net gain, but they are proposing some mitigation measures in terms of like bat and bird boxes, hedgehog kind of holes between. There obviously will be an impact on biodiversity, but they are proposing and obviously the additional planting as well. So I can't give you a kind of cumulative sum, but there will be an impact, but they are proposing some mitigation measures as well.
Councillor Stevens.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of points. Can we go back to the new or the amended parking condition and this issue of, I think you highlighted it in red about having to park in the garage. There we are. Does that mean then, the bit in red, that the only use the garages can be permitted for is parking of cars? Is that, am I reading that right?
I think there may be some opportunity. The garages are of sufficient size that there may be able to be some storage, cycle storage, etc., facilitated around the car, but principally, yes, it is to be retained for parking. The electric vehicle charging point would also look to be provided within the garage.
How are we looking to enforce this? Because what happens if Mr. or Mrs. new homeowner come home and say, no, I'm parking on the road perfectly safely, no yellow lines, in the same way I happen to park outside. I don't have a garage, so I park outside my home safely and legally on no yellow lines. If that happens under this permission, if it's granted, will that necessitate enforcement action because they're not complying with an agreed condition?
I suppose it would be hard for us to stop people parking on the street. The space, I suppose, would be available for vehicles to park in, but whether people choose to park in their garage might be another matter.
So this is completely unenforceable as a condition.
I suppose it's
When it
not,
says shall be retained for the parking of vehicles, that's a hope that they'll park there, not... A condition is normally you will do something, you will only build at 10 metres, or you will use this material. And if they don't, we take, through Natalie and our colleagues, we take enforcement action. I can't help thinking that we would look a bit daft to take planning enforcement action because people are parking perfectly legally on the road, just like the rest of Mutley Road residents presumably are able to. So if this, and we're always told when we're looking at conditions they have to be enforceable. That's what committee members get told. So I'm struggling to see why we should be putting on a condition that's not enforceable.
I suppose it's about safeguarding the space. If residents were parking on the road and their garage was full of other things and they were unable to park in it, that would be enforceable. If the space was available but they were choosing not to use it, then that would be slightly different, yeah.
So I'm conscious I've been talking a lot. So we're going to go around and inspect the contents of people's garages to see whether it's empty or full of stuff like Dell and Rodney's on Only Fools and Horses was always full of stuff and no one could park in there. This just seems a bit silly, Chair. I've got another point on the design, but I'm conscious other people might want to come back in.
I will come back to you. I think your point's been well advanced. I think the officer has attempted to answer that. I will come back to you on the other point. I'm going to bring in Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was present last time and I argued that actually a deferral might make the application more acceptable. It's just unfortunate that for me there hasn't been enough change in the report that's been presented today and the plans that the developer is suggesting. So to cut to the chase, I shan't be supporting the application, and it's disappointing that the developer hasn't taken on board the committee's overriding views that they gave across the spectrum of the planning committee last time to make it a more acceptable development.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your welcome back. Obviously a little bit ring rusty, but Councillor Stevens really raised the points that I picked up on with regards to the enforceability. Being fairly familiar with that part of town and the city generally, parking is a premium. I appreciate there's lots of properties that have garages and driveways that unfortunately aren't used to their capacity and people tend to park on the road. But to my mind, if this was a consideration before, it's just going to exacerbate matters, as has been alluded to by Councillor Mahoney, that they are relatively large properties with possibly multiple vehicles, and I can't see how you can enforce somebody to use that garage. And it does say preoccupation condition, but surely it would be when it's occupied, it would also need to apply, and I don't think there's any teeth. So I think that's been covered by Councillor Stevens, what you've spoken about. The question that I really wanted to ask, however, was, I wasn't privy to the previous meeting and the separate issues, but I see that it has been subject to an appeal, and being sort of reasonably well versed with regards to the integrity and the conduct of this committee, I just really wanted to ask either you, Chair, or Amy, what is it today that we are actually able to refuse, bearing in mind it's already been put to an appeal, and that appeal, the inspector has come back and basically said, I don't have any problems with this going ahead. So could you just clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, that's fine. So this is a technical detail consent. So what was determined at appeal and allowed at appeal was the permission in principle. So it was in principle matters that were allowed and considered acceptable at appeal. So that counts to the amount of development, so 4, the land use, so being residential, and the location. So they considered that to be acceptable. So I think in principle, we could not refuse, in my opinion, on in principle matters. Things that are considered at technical detail consent is the technical details, design, the number of parking spaces, mitigation, like it just, so yeah, like the full application. So, you know, I know that you've been on committee before. It's a bit like the outline and reserve matters, outline being similar to the permission in principle and the reserve matters being the technical detail consent.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Tippett.
Thank you, Chair. My question's going back to the trees. I noticed that there is at least one, and I apologise if I've missed others, that is subject to a tree preservation order. And as I wasn't at committee last time, and I haven't had the chance, like Councillor Stoneman, to watch the meeting back, as I found out I was substituting Tuesday evening, would that tree be retained as part of the plans, or will it be removed?
So yeah, there's two trees that are subject to a tree preservation order. One being the lime sycamore, which is what I referred to, which is proposed to be removed, and then one sycamore, which is proposed to be retained. So my recommendation is said that it's acceptable for the lime to be removed, given the inspector's previous decision, which has said what I mentioned earlier about the health of the tree, and we've also, as a council, have previously allowed for it to be felled.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just could you take us back to the plan, because I wasn't on the committee the first time and I didn't get a very good look at it. Which the one, sorry, the one that shows the parking specifically. I just wanted. So, is that the garage and then a car in front of the garage?
I've got my whole presentation from the last committee, so I might just flick through that, and that might be a little bit easier. So, that might give you a better idea. So it's kind of like an undercroft garage,
okay,
and then a parking space in front.
Okay, fine. So from a design perspective then, if we're saying that garage has to be used by a car, that's pretty inconvenient system for residents, I suppose, isn't it? If you're living in that house, to have a car in front of a car is going to be tricky. I realise that's not necessarily a concession. I just want to put that out there. Out of interest, do we have any information on the size of that garage and whether it's actually going to be big enough for the type of cars that may be owned by the residents of that street? Just knowing that in other developments in the city, garages are built, designed to have cars in them, and then cars get bigger and the garages aren't used, and then we have that natural impact on the surrounding areas.
So our local highway authority have considered the plans. They have got the dimensions, obviously, on the plans and would have considered that. They were happy with the size. We have got a standard size, given cars come in all shapes and sizes, but we've got a standard kind of diameters and what we want a garage to be, and this complies with that. So our local highway authority haven't raised any objection on parking grounds.
But ultimately, we can't guarantee that it's big enough for the 4x4 that somebody might have or something like that. We're just doing a standard size. I'm just really conscious we could be giving permission for a garage, telling people on a condition that they have to use it, and then they personally have a car that is too big for that garage, at which point that entire point in the application is moot, essentially.
And yeah, I get the point raised, but then I suppose in someone that's purchasing, that we've got a condition that's basically saying that garage needs to be retained for the provision of parking. It's not saying that you have to park there in terms of enforceability. That would be a tricky one to enforce. But also, then they're going to know the size of their garage, and you would hope that they'd buy a car suitable for parking there if you want to park it, given a car parking space. But in terms of, yeah, I get what you're saying, but we've got to work on standard sizes, and we have, and we consider it to be acceptable on what's been provided.
Yeah, so just to sort of elaborate on that point, so the size standards in our supplementary planning document are 3.5 by 6.5, so that has been increased with the joint local plan to kind of take into account, I suppose, the slightly larger vehicles and the need to provide sort of electric vehicle charging within them, and sort of people to have space to move around their vehicles.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. Can we turn to the design please. And you put up a statement from the urban design officer in your presentation, Amy. I'll wait. So I'm sorry.
Is it the
That's
the
it.
comment?
Yeah, that's it. Yes. So does that apply to, or was that received in response to the new amended one, or was that the original?
So
appearance?
this was at pre-application stages, so before the application was submitted. I'll show you that. So the design that they actually submitted at pre-application stages was this one. Like I said, this is just the illustrative plan. And then that at pre-app stages, that's what led to the comments from our internal design officer saying this.
I may have misunderstood. Forgive me if I have, Chair. Can you just go back to the that one? So I got the impression during your presentation that the plans have now changed to that. Is that so? I've obviously misunderstood. Forgive me if I have.
No, and I could have made it clearer. So
Yeah.
they haven't submitted amended plans.
They what? So sorry.
They've not submitted
Okay, yeah.
amended plans. What they've done is done an illustrative drawing to show how the bay window would look. So this is purely illustrative. So the plan effectively is you'd be, if you were minded to grant permission, you'd be granting permission for this scheme, but with a condition saying that we've got to agree the further details of the bay windows, which they're proposing will then now propose to look something like that.
There was a very helpful shot on the slide you put up in response to Rebecca's point about parking, which was a sort of 3D mock-up looking from above, which I think showed the design in relief, if we can go back to there. That's it. So that one on the right, I think, is very, very helpful, because I misunderstood. I thought you'd said that the design had changed to mirror the terrace with which we can just see the end of on the right there. My main concern, as you remember, Chair, last time was the design, and I know that we're on the border of the conservation area, but I do think, given the historic setting, what's proposed is still... My hopes were raised when I thought they were changing, but even with a bay approach as opposed to that more 90-degree one there, I disagree with the urban design officer. I think mirroring the terrace as much as possible would have been preferable. That was my main concern last time, and it's still my main concern today.
Great, there's no question there at the moment. Thank you. Okay. Cathy, Councillor Watkins.
I'm not entirely clear how the trees actually fit in at the front with the parking spaces, and how, in fact, you'd be able to get into the car parking spaces once the trees grew up.
Yeah, so they provided obviously these indicative, the plans. We have got conditions to have further details on the landscaping, which would include details of the trees, the tree pits and things like that. And we would be dealing with that via condition, with obviously in consideration of the parking spaces, but we wouldn't want to infringe on being able to park the car.
Yeah, but I thought it was quite tight to get into the car parking spaces anyway, and have you got a plan showing how that would actually be achieved?
As in, I've got a plan in front on now. I know it's not as clear as it is, but we've got the tracking plan just showing how cars will manoeuvre in and out of the car parking spaces. And while it doesn't show the trunk of the tree, it does have the kind of canopy, so you can get an idea in comparison to the canopy about the car trips.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad Councillor Stevens raised that, because I, coming in fresh, was under the impression that the facade had changed and therefore it was more in keeping. But I'm a little bit looking at page 7 with the consultation responses. The urban design actually object, as does the historic environment officer. But you've obviously looked it over and are now saying grant with conditions. The bit that I've got a dilemma with is I don't agree with the parking provision, but if the inspector has already looked and said that that is an appropriate site for 4 houses, which is and the commensurate parking, I just feel, as much as I would like to object today and refuse it, I'm looking at the practicalities. It's already gone to an appeal and it's been highlighted, and therefore the inspector, to some extent, has already taken all those things into account. And therefore, it's just going to be, potentially, I could reject it along with other colleagues, but the inspector's already covered these things off and said that they're all acceptable. So I don't fully understand.
Councillor Kelly, sorry to interrupt you, but I think, particularly for members who weren't here previously, we debated this at quite some length, and Katie will come in a moment and clarify. But it's important that we acknowledge what the inspector agreed in principle for dwellings. The technical detail, i.e. Parking, impact on highway, that's down to us. So I'll bring Katie in at this point, but there's a very important distinction there.
I think it might be helpful if I kind of quote from the inspector's decision. So towards the end of the decision, he states, concerns have also been raised about the appearance of the street frontage of the development and the suitability of the access and parking arrangements depicted on the indicative plans. However, whilst I have had regard to this indicative material in relation to the impact on the protected trees, these plans are not approved by the permission in principle, which only relates to the location, land use and amount of development. Therefore, the appearance of the houses and the number and arrangement of the parking spaces falls to be considered at the technical detail stage.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Chair, for drawing my attention to it. But equally, I'm aware that if you've given outline permission for 4 properties, there is a standard with regards to the number of vehicle spaces per accommodation, and I would imagine that providing 2 actually meets the requirements. It's the practicalities of the unenforceability of saying you've got to use it, which would then put more cars back on the road. And can I just, final question, what was the reason with regards to the applicant not submitting a revised facade rather than just indicative purposes, knowing that that was one of the issues that were raised?
He had the choice to.
No, that's fine.
And what we've got is what he has submitted in relation to what was submitted last time. So.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. For me, there is no real change from the last iteration that we've seen. If only my concerns are raised about how the proposed application intends people to drive out of their car parking spaces. I know that road particularly well. It is high density, both with homes and vehicles. At times driving down it, sometimes you wish you had a bike rather than a car. For that reason, I've got nothing more to add, and I'd like my opinion recorded as I would reject. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Partridge, I can see no substantive change from last time. I think there's a lot of loss of amenity to the other properties in the surrounding area. One loss of amenity might be mitigated, but I think there's a considerable loss to the various properties, and for that reason I'll be refusing it.
Thank you, members. Can I just raise 2 questions? The additional trees that have been put in further to consultation between the applicant and the agent, am I correct in understanding the additional 13 trees are going to go in the front? No, it's in the back. Could you just show me where they're going, please?
So they haven't submitted a plan, but where they would be going is the southern boundary, which is the bottom section here, so in the rear of the amenity space, along that boundary, where there's already additional planting. So the only trees to the front along Motley Road would be the 4 proposed street trees, and the additional 13 would be at the back.
Thank you. And just a second point of clarification leading on from the debate last time and certainly debated this time. In terms of the car parking facilities, the garages, we don't keep a register as a local authority of the vehicle details of the cars associated with the premises and oblige people to update said register. So we wouldn't know if Mr. Occupier has a BMW or a Range Rover or a Mini.
No, we don't.
Okay. So if we were to go around to inspect whether the garages have been used for Mr. Occupier's Range Rover or Mini, we wouldn't be able to tell. Is that right?
Yeah, effectively what the condition's doing is ensuring that there is space. You're making sure there's space available to park a car. The condition isn't enforcing that they have to park their car within that garage.
Thank you. Members, of the fear of missing somebody out, I don't think I've got anybody left on my list. Last orders. Great. Okay, members, thank you very much. This matter has been debated significantly at our last meeting and again today. I'm very grateful. You've seen the officer's recommendation. In a moment, you'll be invited to vote on your keypads. Please do so. Okay, members, you will note that there is slightly time remaining and not to fall foul on a procedural point, we'll allow that to elapse. There we are, members. Members, you've decided to go against the officer's recommendation and refuse the application today. I'd welcome your decisions in respect to that, to support that, and in particular what you're planning. I noticed Councillor Stevens very helpfully raising his hand.
My vote against was on the basis of the design of the proposed new terrace. I think it's... I disagree with the statement from the urban design officer. I think it's not in keeping with the surrounding historical and semi-historical terraces of Mutley Road, and that was the reason for my vote, Chair.
Councillor Partridge.
My reasons were for the same as Councillor Stevens. It's going against the advice. It's not in keeping with the local area, and as well as my concerns I raised about the ability to egress off of the driveway in a safe manner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thanks. Well, I support both Councillor Stevens' point on design and obviously Councillor Partridge's point, particularly on parking. But I think in design, it's also the massing of the design. It's too much on the site, so it's really overdevelopment in my view. And that is a design and massing issue that could be dealt with through a more appropriate design.
Thank you. Councillor Tibbets.
I didn't make it clear for my questions, but I voted against it for a number of reasons. I was worried about, again, in keeping with the area, with the design. I was also very concerned about the actual development of the site, particularly with the parking issues, the narrow roads, the issues that Councillor Mahoney raised, and finally, also the trees issue did come into my decision to vote against.
Councillor Stillman.
Thank you, Chair. I echo the sentiments of colleagues already, and also the potential impact on biodiversity and wildlife loss from the potential development.
Thank you. Councillor Watkin.
I voted against because I think we ought to take this opportunity to provide quality development in this area. And this, there are so many aspects of this that would interfere with the neighbours. and there be a loss of amenity to them, and that's the reason I've refused.
I also note during the debate we've discussed the separation distances between properties, acknowledging that those built 100 years ago were built in accordance with different planning regimes, shall we say. It is a departure from policy, and that has been mentioned at this meeting and the previous meeting. And I'm trying to decide from my notes. The 4-storey housing, which is probably in line with Councillor Nicholson's massing on the development, and absence being presented with an illustrative in respect to the windows, still unclear as to that design element of the properties. And parking, the unenforceability of the condition that's going to assuage the concerns in terms of the highway, the impact on the highways. The condition is unenforceable and will not assist or address the impact on the highways. And I also noted that it didn't comply with our own highways guidance in any event. Have you captured enough of those reasons, Katie?
Yes, so the first refusal reason would be related to the design, including the massing and sort of overdevelopment of the site, which would be linked to policy Dev 20 of the Joint Local Plan. Then further refusal reason on inadequate parking given the garage arrangement, which would link to Dev 29 of the Joint Local Plan. A loss of amenity due to the insufficient separation distances, contrary to Dev 1. And then biodiversity, insufficient biodiversity net gain is. And then there was a comment about the trees. I'm not sure in terms of sort of specifics in relation to the trees.
Through you, Chair, it was specifically the loss of trees, but better worded in the general loss of biodiversity, so it all comes under that one.
Okay. It did, yeah. They are proposing sort of replacement trees in line with the SPD, but I'll kind of capture that with the biodiversity.
Sorry, Chair, I thought you were going around asking each of us for our... Is that not the case? We've got to put our hand up to say what we wish to raise?
Yes, but as you probably detected as I was doing so, it was becoming a bit repetitive. So I just thought we'd try and capture all of that, unless you're about to introduce something that we haven't discussed.
I will introduce a new one.
Thank you.
So on page 18, it's 6.3. Whilst it is a guideline, I think that we need to send out a clear message that a guideline of 50 square metres for amenable space is there for a reason, and one of the properties goes down to 37, so that's almost a quarter less than actually what's the guideline. Whilst there might be parks nearby, I think it's important that any future housing stock is built with the guidelines in mind, and therefore the quality of the accommodation overall is of a higher standard, not keep diminishing what we build.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Thank you, members. I'm hoping Katie's captured all that. Thank you very much. Great. On to the next agenda item, which is 6.2, concerning 86 Milehouse Road. Amy, is this you again? No. Thank you, Amy. Abby, my apologies. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for a 2-storey dwelling to be built within the rear garden space of 86 Milehouse Road. The opposite recommendation is to approve subject to conditions. The site is located within Stoke and is within close proximity to Stoke Local Centre. Here is an aerial view of number 86, which is a terrace property with a large rear garden measuring approximately 30 metres in length. Here is another view, but in map form. So this is a view of the rear of the site. 86 Mile House Road is the bluey-grey terrace property. The building has previously been converted to 2 flats. Located in the middle of the rear garden is a single-storey double garage, which is the white building there just north of my arrow. This was approved in 2008 and was approved on the condition that the garage would serve the residents of the property. There is a service lane to the left of the garden, which separates the site from neighbouring property number 111 Beaumont Street. This lane provides access to a number of domestic garages. Looking to the right, you can see that there are single-storey garages within neighbouring gardens, and then further up the street, there are 2 bungalows fronting Beaumont Street. So the application relates to the rear end of the garden where the arrow points, and the proposed dwelling would front Beaumont Street. Now, dropping down into street view, the site is there on the right. Beaumont Street is characterised by Victorian 2-storey terrace dwellings. There are no parking restrictions along Beaumont Street, and it is acknowledged that the street gets congested with on-street parking. So here is a view looking directly at the site from Beaumont Street. Here is another view of the site moving slightly further along the street. You can see the laneway there, and you can see that there's an existing Plymouth limestone boundary wall that runs around the site. And then as we move further down Beaumont Street, the site is now up there on our left. So in terms of planning history, there have been previous refusals and appeals for a dwelling on this site. The applications date between 2003 and 2012. Previous concerns have included impact on neighbouring amenity, lack of external amenity space, impact on street scene, but the reoccurring concern is the fact that previous applications have sought to dedicate one of the parking spaces within the existing double garage to serve the new dwelling. As I mentioned earlier, this garage was approved on the condition that it would serve the existing residents of number 86, and ultimately the loss of that space would likely result in additional on-street parking, which was considered unacceptable in this location. So earlier this year, the applicant submitted a pre-application for a 2-storey dwelling on this site. Officers raised no in-principle objections to residential development, as the site's located within a well-established residential area and is within close proximity to Stoke Local Centre, with good public transport links to the city centre. Unlike previous applications, the proposal included a new parking space adjacent to the existing garage. It was considered that this overcame the previous highway concerns, and it was concluded in the pre-app that, through careful design, the site could accommodate a dwelling. So moving on to the application before us. So here is the proposed site plan. So what this shows is the footprint of the dwelling, and then to the north of this, there's an external courtyard area which contains cycle and bin storage. And then further north is the proposed parking space which would be created. And then the building to the north of that is the existing garages, which serve the residents of number 86, which we saw in the photographs. So in terms of design and appearance, this proposed street elevation shows the proposed dwelling on the right and the existing adjacent terrace on the left. The laneway separates the two. So the dwelling's been designed to reflect the appearance of the existing properties within Beaumont Street and would match the height of the adjacent terrace. It would also follow the existing building line. The dwelling would be slightly wider than the adjacent properties, and the entrance door would be on the side elevation accessed via the laneway. So that shows the side elevation there with the entrance door and the proposed rear. Proposed materials include rendered walls, which is consistent with the surrounding properties, and a natural slate-tiled roof, which is welcomed. The proposal seeks to retain the limestone boundary wall, but reduce its height. Given the size constraints of the site, officers consider it necessary to request further details, including a construction method statement for the boundary wall through a pre-commencement condition. Having discussed the application with the council's urban design team, they raised no objection and considered that the proposal would provide a natural continuation of the street. That's just the other side elevation there, which would be predominantly blank. So in terms of living conditions, the proposal meets the NDSS minimum floor space requirements, and all habitable rooms are served by windows. External amenity space is below the 100 square metre SPD requirement. The proposal includes a 40 square metre external courtyard, which includes the parking space and cycle and bin storage. Now, I'm just going to go back to the aerial shot originally. So this shows obviously the properties within Beaumont Street. So typically properties within Beaumont Street contain small rear courtyards, and the SPD does allow for flexibility of the standard where the site is located within close proximity to public open space. So this site is located within 6 minutes walking distance to Blockhouse Park and 13 minutes walking distance to Central Park, and this is considered sufficient to mitigate the lack of on-site amenity space. Now, in terms of impact on neighbouring residents, so number 111 Beaumont Street has a side-facing window in the first floor of the rear tenement. This window is obscurely glazed and serves a bathroom. The proposed dwelling is shorter in depth than the neighbouring properties, so it's not considered that it would restrict daylight or outlook or impact privacy. The distance between the proposed dwelling and the rear elevation of 86 and 88 is approximately 23 metres, which meets the 21 metre separation distance requirement of the SPD. In addition, the proposed dwelling would only contain one window in the rear elevation at first floor, which would serve a bathroom and would therefore be obscurely glazed, and this is recommended to be secured via a condition. It's also recommended to restrict permitted development rights for building alterations, including window alterations. In terms of existing residence outlook, the dwelling would be visible from surrounding gardens, particularly numbers 86 and 88. Given the substantial size of the gardens, which are approximately 30 metres in length and 7 metres in width, it's not considered that a dwelling would result in an overbearing impact on the existing residents sufficient to warrant a refusal. This was the view of the planning inspector in the 2009 appeal, which was for a similar sized dwelling. The distance between the dwelling and the opposite side of Beaumont Street is 13 metres, which falls below the 21 metres requirement. The SPD allows for flexibility of the standard where the site is located within an older and more densely developed neighbourhood. Given that the 13 metres is consistent with distances between the terrace dwellings along Beaumont Street, officers considered this would not warrant a refusal of this application. This was also the view of the planning inspector in the previous appeal. Okay, so in terms of highways, unlike previous applications for a dwelling at this site, the current application seeks to provide a new car parking space. The local highway authority were consulted on the application and raised no in principle objection. In terms of the level of parking provision, the indicative parking level set out within the SPD required 2 spaces for a 2-bedroom property. The Highway Authority considered that a shortfall of 1 parking space for the new dwelling would not warrant a refusal of this application due to its sustainable location. So Milehouse Road bus stops are located in close proximity to the site, offering regular services to the city centre, and there are a range of shops and services in the area which are accessible on foot. Now, given the narrowness of the laneway, tracking plans were requested to evidence safe vehicle access and egress from the proposed parking space. Tracking plans were provided and are considered to be acceptable by Highways. I appreciate they're pretty small on the screen there, but these are the tracking plans, and they show a standard size family car making a single manoeuvre into the space and a single manoeuvre out of the space into the lane. The proposal also includes an EV charging point and 2 cycle spaces, which are recommended to be secured via conditions. Both of those aspects comply with SPD requirements. So moving on, in regards to drainage and flooding, no objections have been raised by the local lead flood authority, subject to a pre-commencement condition requiring the submission of a surface water drainage strategy. South West Water have commented on the application and concur with this view. In regards to biodiversity, no objections have been raised by the Council's natural infrastructure team. The applicant is proposing bird and bat boxes, which are recommended to be secured via condition. So to conclude, officers are satisfied that the application complies with planning policy and recommend conditional approval. Section 15 of the officer report sets out the recommended conditions. In addition to those that I've already kind of mentioned, officers recommend a condition requiring bin storage to be kept on site at all times except collection day, a condition removing permitted development rights in regards to extensions, window alterations, roof alterations and outbuildings, and a conditions also recommended ensuring works are carried out in accordance with the Council's Code of Practice to mitigate impact on the residential amenity of the area. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Abby. We have a speaker in respect to this application, Councillor Creswell. Would you like to come down to the front, please? Councillor, you have 5 minutes. Would you like a 1 minute warning? Thank you. When you're ready, thank you.
There is, as the committee will be well aware, a fairly long history with this site and the desire to have another dwelling at the bottom of what would have been a garden. This ranging from a 3-bedroom bungalow, which was proposed back in 2003, and now the present plan of a 2-storey building with a dedicated parking space. Furthermore, prior to this most recent application, residents did report that works had started on the site, including clearing of trees and debris as part of an existing boundary wall being removed before full planning permission. I do find myself somewhat concerned and sceptical. It seems to me that this is an overdevelopment of a site, to be honest. I'm well aware of the need for family homes and the need to build houses. At the present time, there's a very lively debate going on in the Conservative Party about this very issue. However, I'm not convinced that this unit will fulfil the criteria of a family home available for purchase. Not many people would choose to build a 2-storey home at the bottom of their own garden for sale or rent. Given that the main house is already in 2 flats, I believe, and there's been additional rooms created in the roof space, it brings me back to an overdevelopment of the site. My biggest concern is that related to parking. Parking is perhaps one of the biggest single issues we face in the inner city ward like mine in Stoke. I gather that this has been overcome by having a space that would be big enough and suitable for a family car. How I do question this, there is an amount of garage and off-road parking in many of the houses in Stoke, but the fact is that these garages were designed when our cars were smaller, so consequently, cars tend to be parked on the road rather than in garages. Garages are then used for other things. In fact, a point made by one of those making representation that the existing garage is used for commercial storage rather than for residents' parking. I gather that an enforcement order has actually been raised, and very interesting given the debate that was on the previous item. There is one off-road parking space being allocated for this property, see page 39, section 821. In line with the indicative parking requirements set out with the SPD, a 2-bedroom dwelling would require 2 parking spaces. The Highway Authority considered that a shortfall of 1 parking space at this site would not warrant a refusal of this application due to the sustainable location. Milehouse Road bus stops are located in close proximity to the site, offering regular services, including the city centre in Derriford, and there are a range of shops and services in the area which are accessible on foot. A 2-bedroom property, though, would normally require 2 parking spaces. The Highway Authority seems to be making an exception here, but if you live there and witness the problems people have with parking, they might think otherwise. Furthermore, there is this expectation that residents will park their car in the allotted off-road space. This would be very unlikely given the size of the average family car, the convenience of parking on the road as opposed to manoeuvring the car into a challenging space. I know something about this. Why do you think I drive a Mini? Not to mention getting things and people in and out of the car once you're in the space. In reality, it's likely the vehicle will be parked on the highway 9 times out of 10. There are lots of amenities in Stoke, nearby shops, Stoke Village, a soon-to-be village postbox and bus routes, but I don't think this will guarantee residents will park their car off-road or not have a second vehicle. I have a general concern about the overdevelopment of the site and potentially others, also relating to drainage and flooding. The loss of what is in fact should be a garden space, even if it wasn't a well-kept garden, does raise an issue of potential flooding locally. We're seeing an increased number of all areas of our city being tarmacked over, and with this, the issue of natural drainage must become a concern.
You have
not
1
to
minute
mention
remaining.
environment and biodiversity. Finally, I'd like to raise that this is a 2-storey property going to be used by and for whom? Is it really going to be a family home? Is it likely to perhaps end up as an Airbnb? I know we had a discussion about that before in this very committee. And I think the same question could perhaps be raised here. I'd like to thank the committee for listening to me yet again and would ask you to consider my representations as a local councillor and urge you to reject and refuse this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Creswell. No other speakers on this. Members, it's over to you. Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Chair. Question for the officer. Page 48.29, looking at all the drainage. 8:30, the site is located in a critical drainage area where the Environment Agency considers the existing drainage system to be at or close to capacity. If we pause there, this area is already an incredibly dense area of housing. The public sewer, as noted by the Environment Agency, is close to capacity. What is your opinion on adding a further two-bedroomed property that's going to add even more pressure to a Victorian sewage system?
So South West Water have commented on the application, and as I said, our local lead, the flood authority, don't raise any objections. So the idea of that pre-commencement condition is that they will supply a surface water drainage strategy that will kind of outline the proposed sort of drainage strategy that they intend to use. If it is that they want to connect to the combined sewer, then through that pre-commencement condition, we've stated that they would need to provide written approval from South West Water for connections and also attenuation levels. So it will be dealt with through that pre-commencement condition.
Thank you. So with regards to attenuation levels, at the moment, this is looking from the pictures, just a bit of grass, maybe a little bit of cement or concrete pad. But for the majority, there's soil and grass where, in a heavy downpour, things that start at the top of the hill don't inevitably end up running down the hill because the grass soaks it up. What do they propose for attenuation if they're going to put a concrete pad over the only bit of greenery in that street?
Well, it's not confirmed yet, but in their drainage strategy, they kind of mentioned that they would look to explore attenuation tanks below the parking area. But it's, as I say, it's not confirmed yet. That would be the details that we'd seek through the condition.
So they haven't put a SIDS or SUDS assessment in for flooding?
So we don't have those details, no, not at this stage.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tibbets.
If I may, Chair, I've got two different questions. Thank you. The first one is on the ecological mitigation, and I found it slightly confusing that we could mandate nesting boxes for birds. I was wondering how that would be enforced.
So they're proposing 3 bird or bat boxes to be installed on I think it's the northwest elevation. So officers have recommended a condition. They submit further details of the specification and the location of those, and then we'll obviously agree the acceptability of that.
Thank you. And the second question, and again, sorry if this is a slightly strange question. I know that people submitting applications through our planning system have to comply with the objectives of our planning. And the word has been sat in my head for the last few minutes and it's suddenly disappeared when I asked the question. But particularly around
I wish that would happen to me or not.
I couldn't possibly comment, Councillor Stevens. And it says here that for example, the boundary fencing between the application site and the neighbouring property has been removed without the neighbours' consent, and works have already started on the site, including clearing trees. To me, whether I'm making this up, I don't know. I think there's something about if someone isn't fully complying in being part of the objectives of our planning system, that can be a reason for refusal or to look at the application unfavourably. Is that something that I can consider when taking the decision, as it seems they've not been fully engaging with the planning system?
Thank you. In relation to the question with regard to the boundary issue, that would be a private matter between the neighbours. Any boundary disputes they have a separate legal framework for regress by the individual neighbour, so that's not something that would be a planning consideration. It's a private matter and it's got its own separate legislation for enforcement.
Supplementary, if I may, Chair. Just going back to the bit about the works already starting on there about the clearing the trees and debris, etc. Is that something that we can consider in terms of have they engaged in good faith with the planning system to support our objectives?
It is correct that if there is intentional unauthorised development, that can be taken into account in the decision-making process. I suppose in this case it is whether there is development that would have required consent. The trees wouldn't have been subject to protection. The site isn't located within the conservation area, so kind of changes to the boundary wall again wouldn't require consent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Stolman.
It's just very quick. Can you go back to the slide where you had, it was a picture of, it had the picture of the current back garden with the garage. That one will do. Thank you. I haven't got a question. I just wanted to look at it before. I'm sorry.
Sorry, is there a question coming?
I just wanted it for clarity in my mind. Thank you.
I was sitting there attentively waiting for your question about that slide. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Well, looking at the site, it's a bit of a scruffy site, so I think a property would actually probably be a favourable addition. However, with consistency, I just want to clarify on 8.10, if I can, Abby, you mentioned for a detached property, ideally the outdoor amenity space should be 100 square metres, but 40 square metres is proposed. In your presentation, though, you also mentioned that there would be a car sort of hard standing. Is that car hard standing, in fact, part of that 40, or is it in addition to that 40?
No, that's correct. So it's 40 square metres external courtyard area, including the parking area and the bin store and cycle store.
So realistically, whilst neighbouring properties don't have large courtyards, and I appreciate that, but you're deviating quite considerably from what amenable space should be. Yeah.
Yes, so it is a significant shortfall from the SBD requirement. Just as I kind of said in the presentation, you know, it does allow for flexibility where it's within close proximity to public open space, and that's what we've obviously used to sort of assess and justify.
Thank you. And a second question on 8.22. Again, we've had an inspector involvement, and it states that they would accept one parking space for a 3-bed property. This is a 2-bed property, but it mentions that planning policy has changed. Could you just clarify, in your expert opinion, would one space be sufficient, or has it changed that the inspector would take a very different view more than likely on that?
Yeah, so the 2009 appeal was for a 3-bedroom property, and the planning inspectorate acknowledged that, so they wanted to use one parking space within the existing garage. So the planning inspector actually used the words of, whilst the new dwelling would be self-sufficient in terms of parking, it would lead to the loss, obviously, of an existing parking space serving the residents. So they've never disputed sort of the one parking space to serve a dwelling in the previous planning refusals and appeals. And I think, but they were sort of, you know, the last, that was 2009, so it was a long time ago, and planning policy has changed. Obviously, we do have the indicative parking requirements of the SBD, and they do state, you know, 2 parking spaces for 2-bedroom properties. But I think in this instance, we can justify the 1 parking space, given its sustainable location, as the Highway Authority have kind of explained.
Thank you. And Chair, final question from me. We heard from the ward councillor, but can you just sort of, again, put me on the right track? We can't really make prejudgments about what that property may or may not be used for. The fact that, you know, Airbnb, that is irrelevant to this today, isn't it? It's whether it stands on its own merits as a dwelling. What future use might be would be subject to potentially another planning alteration or consideration. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Apologies for the height. Can we condition Airbnb use? Because we have had discussions previously, I think.
We couldn't condition Airbnb use. So, you know, Airbnb is, I would say, a grey area in planning terms. So it's not a different use class. So someone renting out their property on Airbnb, if it's a normal family house, we would still say that falls within the C3 use class, so it's not something we could prohibit.
What's the space on that nationally? Thank you. Councillor Watkin.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. One is very general, but it appears that the back garden has been concreted over. Is that correct, or is that, because I haven't had a site visit, or is that, just the colour of it?
I think that's just the image. It's not concreted over, it's like gravel.
It's gravelled, so it's
Soil gravel.
So you could easily be turned back into a garden.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. The second question is much more general. I'm just wondering what the council's policy is on on actually building on small back gardens.
So in our SBD, it does set out that development sort of within gardens, domestic gardens, will be subject to a test of higher suitability. So it will be for the officers to determine that the development does not impact the character and amenity of the area. So that's kind of the wording around sort of development proposed within sort of garden space.
Councillor Poyser.
Just a question in relation to the refuse storage. Is that an enclosed storage area for the refuse? Is that?
So they've just provided it, it just shows a dedicated refuse space. They've not provided on the elevation plans like an actual store as such.
Okay.
So we've just taken it as a dedicated area where the bins would be stored.
And there's sufficient room in there for two 40-litre wheel bins, they're saying?
I don't know the exact dimensions, but I mean, looking at the scale plans, I would be confident in saying that that space could accommodate two 240-litre bins.
Okay. The only question is will they go in front of each other or side by side? Because if they're in front of each other, it's more difficult to get to the bin in front of it. So therefore, it leads to people leaving bins out on the curtilage or the property boundary all the time.
Sure. Well, it shows it within the. I'll just go back to the. So it shows it within the sort of courtyard area. So I suppose. I mean, it's up to them how they place those bins, but I can't see there'll be any difficulty in terms of getting those bins and moving them out into the laneway for collection.
Okay, it's fine. Just this common issue, isn't it? People leaving their bins out on the curtilage all the time. If it's an issue, they can't be properly stored away. So.
Thank you. I have Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Abby, with that one, or indeed the aerial shot, the existing garage had to serve the previous dwelling, and now there's going to be a hard standing. But is the access to the garage and indeed the hard standing solely up that sort of one vehicle wide road? So if, and it's two separate owners, so if the people coming from the garage where there's two vehicles can be stored in there or wanting to come out, but the other people want to come in, it would be a series of, you'd have to reverse back out to the main road, I presume, to let them pass.
Sorry, can you just explain that again? I'm not with you.
So at the moment, you have a very narrow access road
Yeah.
to service the double garage, yeah. And subsequently, the property's been changed into two self-contained flats. But the new dwelling would to access their hard standing, they would have to use that same single track carriageway. Is that right?
Yeah.
And clearly, if the owners of the vehicles coming from the garage were wanting to come out at any point, there's no passing, is there?
No.
So they would have to reverse back out onto the
Yes.
main road. Have highways taken that into consideration? Because I know it's only potentially three vehicles at any one time, but that could be sort of issues with regards to reversing back onto the main road.
Sure, yeah. I mean, they've looked at the tracking plans, so they've looked at the proposal and the arrangements, and they raised no objection. I suppose it's also, like, further up the laneway, there are a number of domestic garages, so that lane serves quite a few residential garages, so it's not just those and this new one.
That's great, thank you. So if there's a problem, it would already be an existing problem.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Tuffin.
Thank you, Chair. If I could come back to the fact that it's a two-bedroom house, which may be a family house or maybe something else, and we've accepted one parking space. Surely, as the local council has pointed out, there is a dire parking problem in that area. Surely that would be taken into consideration. It wouldn't be black and white, we can have one car park. But when you look at, as Councillor Kelly's highlighted, the difficulty of parking in there, surely the fact that a single vehicle for what is a family property is more difficult to accept from a perspective of the people that live together there. So I suppose the question I'm asking is, when you considered a single vehicle, did you also consider the local parking issues and the local situation?
Yes, so in terms of the volume of parking proposed, obviously we have accepted that it is a heavily congested area, but because of its sustainable location, you know, that's why Highway Authority considered that actually the shortfall of one space as per the indicative parking standards of the SBD isn't so significant to warrant a refusal of the application. And that kind of follows, as I say, the previous sort of 2009, whilst it was a long time ago, you know, they didn't dispute the number of parking spaces to serve the new dwelling. I just wanted to mention as well that in terms of the actual car parking space, it meets it, I think it's in excess of our SBD sort of dimensions, and the vehicle tracking plans that they show, that actually shows a standard family size car, which the exact dimensions is 4.8 metres by 2 metres, which is comparable to your SUVs and your sort of people carriers. So it's not a very small space. It is designed to accommodate a larger type car.
Members, I don't have any more speakers on this matter. It's come to that point where you've been asked to vote on this application. You've seen the officer's recommendation, and that is to grant conditionally. So in a moment you'll be invited to vote on your pads. Please do so. Thank you, members. As illustrated, that application is refused. I now invite you to proffer any reasons in respect of that. So Katie will make some notes and we will formalise our decision. Councillor Tippett.
My main reasons for voting against were the overdevelopment of the area, the parking concerns, particularly with it being an area that's already got a lot of parking issues, and also the loss of the natural drainage system from losing a garden space.
Councillor Tuffin, sorry.
Chair, thank you. Obviously, I echo those concerns because
it's a serious point, Chair, that this is now for councillors who voted against the officer recommendation.
I did abstain, he's quite correct.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens, for being so on the ball. The invitation was for members who had refused, but I'm delighted that you want to take part in the debate. Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Kelly.
In addition to what's already been mentioned, it's really going back to 8.10 that if you're going to look for development in a garden type setting, really you need to be ticking, in my view, an awful lot of the boxes, and what that demonstrates is that you can't provide anywhere near the quality amenity space. And when you then take into account that a bin store and a car is going to eat into that 40 square metres, I think that singly identifies the fact that you've got a very small space and you're trying to squash something in, so it's overdevelopment. Had that been met, then I think the scheme would have been acceptable for me. But no, for that reason, Chair, and the parking issues prior.
Thank you. Councillor Stoneman.
I would say my main issue is the point that Councillor Kelly highlighted, the lack of external amenity to the property, as well as obviously the parking. But that was my biggest problem with the issue with the development.
Thank you. And there was also debate about the distance between the properties coming below the minimum 21 metres. It's sitting at 13, and also the two parking spaces. Yes, thank you. Any more for any more?
My reasons, Chair, are again the distance you mentioned and the lack of detail around proper attenuation, and that it's already noted that the South West Water pipe is already close to capacity.
Councillor Watkin.
I would just add to the loss of green space and amenity area.
Thank you. Katie, have you got enough there?
Yeah, I think so, Chair. So a refusal reason linked to kind of the standard of accommodation being created and the lack of amenity space related to Dev 10. Inadequate parking linked to Dev 29. The amenity distances linked to Dev 1 and inadequate drainage details.
I think that's about it. Thank you very much, members. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Councillor Tiffin. Next on the agenda is planning enforcement. Members, I invite you to note the enforcement set out at pages 47 and 48 of your bundle. Any questions? Duly noted. Councillor Kelly.
No, Chair, I think, just humour me, I'm new back to this, but so 193 cases outstanding, 16 received and 41 closed. So it would appear that we're closing that backlog. What I don't know, is that a considerably high amount of cases outstanding compared to historical caseloads within Plymouth City Council? And more specifically, how do we compare perhaps with similar sized cities across the UK?
So I suppose enforcement numbers have been fairly stable around the 200 mark for a number of months. Summer 2021, we did have around 400 cases. So we have considerably kind of reduced cases over the last 18 months or so. I can't offer any comparison to other authorities, I'm afraid.
So that leads to my supplementary question in the sense that if it's around about 200 has been a typical amount, I'm a little bit perturbed that arguably those cases that have come in, people have complained, I presume, about something, yet there's only one breach of condition notice and there's no planning enforcement notices issued at all. So it seems to be that either people are raising things that aren't valid a lot of the time, which could be an educational piece, but again, it's a drain on the resources of the department, or is it that we're very lax in actually enforcing within this city?
I think if there's, I think the reporting of the numbers is useful. I think it's a point that was raised by Councillor Stevens at a previous meeting, and that would be useful to have that comparison meeting on meeting, because we don't all keep our papers. I think it's right that we have that resource to monitor. In terms of drilling down into the detail, unless there's a specific case, I'm not entirely sure that the merits of whether it's a complaint or whether enforceability should be happening is for debate here. Unless, Kate, you want to give a general response, I think it's important that these are just the numbers that are being reported to committee, but I take on board your point. It'd be nice to have each committee having a reference to the previous ones. Kate, do you want to respond on that?
Yeah, I would say, you know, enforcement is a difficult area of planning, and obviously we have to consider expediency with all action we take. Generally, the guidance advises that negotiation should be the starting point for all enforcement. You know, so that is the approach we take. It is fair to say a lot of the complaints we receive are for things that don't require action to be taken against them. So they might be civil issues, they might actually be permitted development, etc. So we don't need to serve notices. But yeah, we do serve notices where necessary, and we will consider, you know, escalation of cases with formal action where required.
Thank you, Chair. What I think would be useful, though, because we are representatives of the public, is I know personally a lot of residents contact me about what they feel are breaches of enforcement. This might be 1 month in isolation that isn't a common practice, but to me, with that number of cases and across all aspects of enforcement, only one has been sort of notice has been issued or a breach identified. It does lead to the question: are we following through as diligently as we can? Because certainly the feedback that I get from residents very often is that they don't feel that we as a council stop rogue builders. Is the gist of it, really.
I think we would endeavour to, you know, follow up any cases, you know, that do have serious breaches of control. I suppose in terms of taking formal action, you know, there is a lot of resource required in terms of doing that, and then there are routes to appeal. So, you know, for a notice we issued against a certain property kind of earlier in the year, that is now stuck in an appeals process. So I think, you know, negotiation, you know, often gets the best outcome and the most timely outcome. It's not always kind of best to go in sort of with a heavy hand to start off with.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Thank you, Katie. Item number 8, planning application decisions issued. Again, pages 49 to 60 of your bundle. It's for you to note, but if there are any specific questions in relation to any of those, happy to take that now. No, thank you. And then item number 9, there are no appeal decisions, so we're clearly doing things right in that regard to discuss today. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
This is just a request, if I may. I don't know where it comes. Previously, we've been sent officer presentations, and then you've at least got them on your screen to flick backwards and forwards. And the last few planning committees, I don't think we've had them. So it was just a request, if possible, could we go back? Unless there was an extenuating reason why that's not happened, I just would request that we start being sent them again. And also the speakers list in advance was really helpful. We get quite a pack in advance, if that's possible, please.
Apologies if you haven't been getting that. I agree with you, and I wish to also note, it's very difficult for the officers presenting when they say just to the north of this. Can they not have a mouse that we could all follow, that they could wave and say, this is where I'm talking about here? It's very difficult to see what the officer is reading from their report when they're talking about the north elevation, and we're looking at a screen thinking, hang on, where are you going with this? So if they had a mouse or a pointer, that would be very helpful. And I think you've caught Councillor Smith's comments as well. Thank you. In terms of item 9, that's the end of the agenda. Is there any other business, Councillor Poyser? Let's stick that on the agenda.
No other business, just to support Councillor Smith's comment there around any information like presentations that could be provided beforehand, including, as you say, Councillor Darcy, additional maps, etc., would be really useful. Thank you.
It did go out, but I'm sure they've got that. Thank you. And members, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening.